Okay, and was from my side. Anyway, let's go ahead with the. We finished the oropharynx. I repeat once again, tonsillar nerve plexus. The venous drainage हमने कर ली थी, मैं इसको फिर repeat कर देती हूँ. The venous drainage starts from the soft palate, the vein, paratonsillar vein, also called external palatine vein, runs on the lateral side of the palatine tonsil, outside the capsule of the palatine tonsil. Okay? And then pierces the lateral wall of the palatine tonsil, that is, pierces the superior constrictor muscles, and then drains into the pharyngeal plexus. The pharyngeal plexus forms on the walls, around the walls of the pharynx. Lymphatic drainage जो है, the lymph nodes that drain the palatine tonsil are lying near the angle of the mandible. They are the lateral and inferior group of lymph nodes. Plus, you have jugular digastric nodes. They also drain the palatine tonsil. That is why they are called tonsillar nodes. Tonsil की nerve supply comes from tonsillar plexus of nerves, जिसमें contribution है from the glossopharyngeal and the vagus nerves. Okay. Laryngopharynx. Okay, the lowermost, the inferior part of the pharynx, I told you. This is also called hypopharynx. This part lies posterior to the larynx. It extends from here. Before going this, let me explain these cartilages to you. These are cartilage of the larynx. ये epiglottis है बेटा, ठीक है? And this is the cricoid cartilage. ये सारा, all this block-like cartilage is the cricoid cartilage. This is the cricoid cartilage over here. This is the epiglottis. ये सारा. And please note this fold. This connects the epiglottis to the lateral wall of the pharynx. ये सारी pharynx की wall है बेटा. This is the muscle of the pharynx. This is the upper part of the superior. This is the middle constrictor. Okay, here constrictor muscles of the pharynx. So this entire thing is the epiglottis that connects. This is the fold that connects the epiglottis to the lateral wall of the pharynx. अब ये extend कहाँ से कहाँ तक करता है laryngopharynx, हमने पहले भी ये बात आपको बताई थी. This extends from the superior border of the epiglottis. ये epiglottis है, ये इसका upper border है. So from the superior border of the epiglottis down to the inferior border of the cricoid cartilage. From here, so from here, superior border of the epiglottis, inferior border of the cricoid cartilage. Okay? And this part of the pharynx, laryngopharynx, is actually resting on the vertebral bodies from C4, 5, 6 cervical vertebrae. C4, 5, 6 cervical vertebrae, this is resting. And this is now the opening of the larynx. Yeah. Sorry. Through this, this is the larynx, cartilage of the larynx. So this is the opening of the larynx. Yeah. Okay. And आपने ये एक basic point पढ़ा हुआ है that during swallowing, this epiglottis comes down, covers this opening of the larynx, and the food from here, this is the mouth, this is the posterior part of the tongue. Food from the mouth slips over the epiglottis and enters into the pharynx. ये walls of the pharynx. जब ये close करेंगे तो they will come like this. Posterior most walls of the pharynx ही होती हैं. Okay. So otherwise, when you were simply sitting and breathing like you're supposed to be doing now, so this laryngeal opening communicates with the laryngopharynx. Here the laryngopharynx on the outside. ये larynx है. This laryngeal opening communicates with the laryngopharynx. अभी तक we have any questions? मैंने पूछा नहीं, आपने बताया नहीं. Any questions so far? फिर हम आगे चलें. I guess not. One question? No, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Gaur. Thank you so much. जी इमरान, अस्सलाम वालेकुम. कोई बात नहीं बेटा, वो बीच में इंटरनेट इंटरप्ट हो गया था, तो मैंने इसलिए आपसे कांटेक्ट किया था. मुनीबा ने कर लिया था सॉर्ट आउट. सॉरी, हो गया, हो गया. ओके, अच्छा जी. सो अब हम बात करते हैं. अभी तक वी वर टॉकिंग अगेन एंड अगेन अबाउट द मसल्स ऑफ द pharynx. Let's go down to the muscles of the pharynx. The muscles of the pharynx को बेटा explain करने के लिए simple way is कि you think of 3 tubes. अच्छा, पहले laryngopharynx कर लेते हैं, इसके muscles कर लेते हैं, फिर मैं सारे pharynx के muscles आपको बता दूंगी. Laryngopharynx. This part is the laryngopharynx, so it will be the middle constrictor and the inferior constrictor. ये posterior and lateral walls बना रहे हैं laryngopharynx. ठीक है? And on the inside you have these muscles, जिसमें palliotopharyngeus है आपका ये वाला, palliotopharyngeus and stylopharyngeus. Yeah. They form the wall of the laryngopharynx. Laryngopharynx में, this is probably the most important structure present in laryngopharynx. ठीक है? अब this is what the piriform fossa is. ये larynx है, ये सारा laryngopharynx है, ये इधर. ठीक है? On either side. ये walls of the laryngopharynx है, middle and inferior constrictor. Okay? This depression on either side of the larynx, this is the piriform fossa. Okay? अब ये देख लीजिए कि ये laryngeal inlet है, ये मैंने आपको बताई. ये laryngeal, ये epiglottis है, ये fold है सारा of mucous membrane, जिसको हम airy epiglottic fold कहते हैं. Retinoid cartilage और epiglottis से lateral wall of the pharynx. This fold actually separates this inlet of the larynx from this lateral structure, which is the piriform fossa. So the piriform fossa, which is a depression lying on either side of the larynx. ये येलो इसलिए किया हुआ कि यहाँ तक extend कर रही है, यहाँ तक. Okay, this is the lateral wall of the pharynx, laryngopharynx. So the piriform fossa, ये जो fold है, fold of mucous membrane covering the lateral side of the epiglottis and cartilages of the larynx. इसमें एक cartilage retinoid cartilage है. So ये जो fossa है, this is separated from the laryngeal inlet by this fold. इसको कहते हैं airy epiglottic fold. ठीक है? So if you look at it carefully, lateral to the, sorry, ये piriform fossa है. Medial to the piriform fossa, you have this fold which is called airy epiglottic fold. ये सारा. It is this fold that separates the laryngeal inlet from the fossa. ओके, ये फोल्ड है एपिग्लॉटिक फोल्ड, ये आगे बढ़ जाएगा यहाँ पर। नाउ दिस इज द हायोइड बोन, दिस इज द थायराइड कार्टिलेज. Extending between the hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage is this membrane. So since it is extending between the hyoid bone and the thyroid cartilage, it will be called thyrohyoid membrane. Okay? And I hope you appreciate one thing, that ye piriform fossa hai beta. So lateral to the piriform fossa, you have thyrohyoid membrane above, and this is thyroid cartilage. So superiorly you have thyrohyoid membrane, and inferiorly you have the thyroid cartilage. They make up the lateral walls of the piriform fossa. Ye lateral wall of the piriform fossa. Okay. Medial wall is formed by epiglottic hole. And please know कि ये जो walls आपको नजर आ रहे हैं, ये nerves and blood vessels के लिए हैं. This fossa is lined by internal laryngeal nerve, which is a branch of superior laryngeal, which in turn is a branch of 10th cranial nerve, which is the vagus nerve. So lying deep to the mucous membrane of this fossa. This fossa is lined by mucous membrane, and lying deep to the mucous membrane is the internal laryngeal nerve. This fact is important because if a foreign body may get lodged in this fossa. So अगर इस fossa में foreign body आके हो जाए, if that foreign body happens to be pointed like बच्चों में chicken की bone या fish की bone, like this, it is mentioned in your book, तो उस सूरत में that pointed end of the bone may pass through and through this membrane or cartilage. Hence, it damages the internal laryngeal nerve. When the internal laryngeal nerve is damaged, वो sensitive nerve supply है. If this nerve is damaged, obviously there is complete loss of sensations in the piriform fossa. इससे पहले क्या था? Normal in you and me, normal people. What happens is, if God forbid any foreign body comes and lodges over here, यहाँ foreign body आके फंस गई, ठीक है? This is mucous membrane, and due to the mucous membrane, the internal laryngeal nerve. This internal laryngeal nerve is very sensitive. Sensory supply यहाँ very rich sensory supply है. So this area is very sensitive. As soon as the foreign body comes, this area, in this area, so a reflex coughing starts in order to push the foreign body out. So अगर खाने में कोई चीज गले में फंस जाती है and you start to cough, तो फिर आप समझ लें कि that foreign body went and got stuck over here in the piriform fossa. तो अभी तो ठीक था. Now, if God forbid by any for any reason, if the foreign body is a pointed foreign body or whatever, sharp-ended foreign body gets stuck over here, and pointed foreign body, it passes through this membrane and damages the internal laryngeal nerve. अब जब internal laryngeal nerve damage होगी तो यहाँ की sensory supply खत्म हो जाएगी. As a result, there will be no sensations left in this area. When there are no sensations left in this area, so if now a foreign body comes and lodges over there, there's going to be no sensations. So no sensation means reflex coughing नहीं होगी और वो foreign body यहीं पे रह जाएगी या it may get dislodged. साथ ही laryngeal inlet है. This foreign body goes and slips into the laryngeal inlet, and then disaster starts. क्योंकि larynx से फिर वो trachea और फिर लंग्स में जा सकती है. इज दिस थिंग क्लियर? प्लीज मुझे अभी बता दीजिए. मैंने सारी अप्लाइड इसमें कवर कर दिया है, which needs to be done with you people. Is everything clear? Okay, madam. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. If it's clear, then that's heartening. Okay. Pharynx के muscles पे आ जाते हैं. बेटा वैसे तो आपको पता है GIT में you have inner circular outer longitudinal muscles throughout the GIT. यहाँ पे थोड़ा सा डिफरेंट है. We have a circular layer outside. ठीक है, एक्सटर्नल सर्कुलर लेयर है और इनर longitudinal layer है. अब ये जो सर्कुलर लेयर है ना, इसको आप समझिए in the way that there are three tubes, one inside the other. और ये ट्यूब्स एक दूसरे को ओवरलैप कर रही हैं, कंप्लीटली एक दूसरे के अंदर नहीं है. दे आर ओवरलैपिंग ईच अदर. ठीक है, थ्री ट्यूब्स ओवरलैपिंग ईच अदर. द सुपीरियर इज superior constrictor, then this is the middle constrictor, this narrow muscle, and this wide muscle, very wide, this is the inferior constrictor. This is the circular layer of muscles or the muscles on the outside. Then comes the inner layer of muscle. The inner layer of muscle, this is the palatopharyngeus, ye wala, going from the palate to the pharynx. Stylopharyngeus, ye. Palatopharyngeus, stylopharyngeus, and ye barik sa jo hai na, salpingopharyngeus. So salpingopharyngeus, palatopharyngeus, and stylopharyngeus. These are the muscles on the inside, and they are the longitudinal muscles. Okay. इन मसल्स की ओरिजिन इंसर्शन कोई ऐसी बात नहीं है कि मैं इसको खुद बैठ के पढ़ाना शुरू कर दूं आपको. यू कैन डू इट ऑन योर ओन. मैं आपको वो दिखा चुकी हुई हूँ, स्ट्रक्चर्स जिनके साथ वो अटैच्ड होते हैं. ओके, सो मैं फिर भी इसको 1 मिनट में रिपीट किए लेती हूँ. सुपीरियर कंस्ट्रक्टर, ये टेरिगोमैंडिबुलर रेफी हमने तब दिखाई थी जब मैंने वैक्सीनेटर किया था. ठीक है, posterior end of mylohyoid line of the mandible, and that insert करता है pharyngeal tubercle. Important thing इसमें ये है कि आप ये याद रखिए कि it is innervated by the pharyngeal plexus, और pharyngeal plexus अभी मैं आपको बताती हूँ that receives contributions from 10th cranial nerve bone. Superior constrictor जो है it receives nerve supply from 10th cranial nerve bone. Middle constrictor stylohyoid ligament से आता है, greater and lesser horns of hyoid bone. ये आपको पता होनी चाहिए बातें. अभी मैं I'll do the hyoid bone tomorrow इंशाल्लाह. और pharyngeal raphe, अभी आपको मैंने raphe between the muscles दिखाई. ये this is the pharyngeal raphe, interdigitating fibers. और ये जो है ये pharyngeal tubercle है, under surface of the base of norma basalis में. This is the pharyngeal tubercle where the superior constrictor muscle of the pharynx goes and gets attached. ये middle constrictor भी, this also goes and gets attached with the in the pharyngeal raphe. और जो inferior constrictor है ये oblique line of the thyroid cartilage से rise करता है and side to the trichal cartilage जो भी हमने देखा था, and helps in the formation of the raphe. अब ये जो दोनों muscles हैं ये pharyngeal branch of the vagus से भी होते हैं, प्लस वेगस की जो nerve है external laryngeal and recurrent laryngeal nerve, उससे भी इसको contribution तो आती है. ये चीज please remember all this as it is. Motor supply ST. And the action of these muscles is they constrict, the Nami constrictor, they constrict the walls of the pharynx. Internal layer अभी आपको दिखाई, palatopharyngeus, hard पैलेट से अराइज करता है, पिनरोसिस ऑफ द हार्ड पैलेट, हार्ड एंड सॉफ्ट पैलेट आप कर चुके होंगे. So this is the palate of pharynges, or on the sides of the pharynx and on the lamina, posterior lamina of the thyroid cartilage, ये वहाँ पे जाता है. Salpingopharyngeus आपको दिखाया था, cartilaginous part of the pharyngotympanic tube. It actually opens the eustachian tube or the pharyngotympanic tube. ठीक है. Okay. Now अब ये भी दोनों 10th cranial nerve से supply हो रहे हैं. Then comes the last muscle, stylopharyngeus, from the styloid process to the pharynx. From thyroid cartilage की side पे. This is supplied by the glossopharyngeal, the only muscle of the pharynx that is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. All the other muscles receive their nerve supply from the 10th cranial nerve, either directly or through branches. ठीक है जी? Okay. Now let's go to the fascia. The fascia covering the pharynx. These are the muscles of the pharynx. Superior constrictor, middle constrictor, inferior constrictor. These are the structures. ये vertebral column है, and these are the structures lying posterior to the muscles of the constrictor muscles of the pharynx. ये once again superior, middle, and inferior constrictor. Okay, now pharyngeal fascia को हम इस तरह define करेंगे कि the pharyngeal fascia basically are sandwiched. ये जो pharyngobasilar fascia है between the pharynx and the base of the skull. This is on the inside. ये pharyngobasilar fascia. ठीक है? मैंने आपको बताया था upper border of the superior constrictor muscle of the pharynx and the basic occiput. This is the pharyngobasilar fascia. Sorry. And it is this fascia which is lying on the inside of the pharynx. Then on the outside, so ye pharynx है, inside of the pharynx, this is the pharyngobasilar fascia. Then comes this fascia. ये inside, अब buccopharyngeal fascia की बात कर सकते हैं. Buccopharyngeal fascia is lying on the outside. ठीक है? So you have these muscles sandwiched between the two layers of fascia. On the inside of the muscles, you have pharyngobasilar fascia. On the outside of the muscle, you have buccopharyngeal fascia. And this is how these fascia are arranged. मैं आपको इसमें समझा देती हूँ. ये कब section है. This is the vertebral column. Okay? This is the vertebral column, and this is the prevertebral fascia covering the vertebral column. Starting from the inside, this is the mucous membrane. Then this is the pharyngobasilar fascia. Okay, pharyngobasilar fascia. Then lies the longitudinal muscle of the pharynx. This is the circular muscle of the pharynx, and on the outside you have buccopharyngeal fascia. Okay. Okay. Is this thing clear? I hope it is. इसमें अगर कुछ नहीं समझ आया तो मेरे से आप पूछ लीजिए. अच्छा जी. Now, this is an important point because आपके एग्जाम में ये क्वेश्चंस बड़े शौक से पूछते हैं. जी बेटे, फैशिया रिपीट करती हूँ. सो आई थॉट मैं इसको रिपीट कर देती हूँ. बेटा, फैशिया के बारे में एक चीज जहन में रख लीजिए कि the two fascia, one on the inside and the other on the outside. On the inside of the muscles, circular muscles, the two layers of muscles, longitudinal and circular. So if we have one fascia on the inside of these layers of muscles, we have the other fascia lying on the outside of the layer of muscles. So आप ये देख लें कि ये जो muscles हैं, they are sandwiched between the two layers of fascia. अब वो दो layers of fascia क्या हैं? On the inside, you have pharyngobasilar fascia lining the inside of the pharynx, और ये जो muscles हैं lying on the outside of this outer surface of the muscle. चलें इस तरह कर रहे हैं. ये muscle की outer surface है. Outer surface of the muscle जो है, that is covered by a fascia which is called buccopharyngeal fascia. जबकि muscle की जो inner surface है, that is lined by a muscle which is called pharyngobasilar fascia. So you have a thick pharyngobasilar fascia on the inside, lining the inside here. Okay? And then you have a thin buccopharyngeal fascia. ये gray सा जो है ना, ये buccopharyngeal fascia है. ठीक है? Okay. अब purpose इनका ये है, simply reinforce the pharyngeal wall. Pharyngobasilar fascia में आपको दिखा देती हूँ. This is the superior border of the superior constrictor. ये base of the occipital bone है. So extending between the base of the occipital bone and the superior upper border of superior constrictor, you have this gap which is bridged by the fascia, which is called pharyngobasilar fascia. मैं इसको यहाँ पे cut section में repeat किए देती हूँ for your convenience. ये vertebral column है यहाँ पे. This is the prevertebral fascia. Okay? ये innermost layer जो होती है mucous membrane की होती है. The entire pharynx, larynx, etc. They are lined by mucous membrane. Next to the mucous membrane is a layer of a well-developed layer of fascia, which is called pharyngobasilar fascia. Then comes the longitudinal layer of muscle. This is a circular layer of muscle. Outside these two layers of muscle, you have the buccopharyngeal fascia. Okay? अब आगे चलें. Okay. Thank you. Let's move ahead. Gaps in the pharyngeal wall. अब आपको मैंने कहा था, the muscles of the pharynx, please think of them as three tubes, one inside the other, overlapping each other. ठीक है? So यहाँ पे देख लीजिए, superior constrictor is being overlapped by the middle constrictor, और जो middle constrictor है इसको overlap कर रहा है inferior constrictor. अब जहाँ ये overlapping है, वहाँ पे gaps हैं. You have a gap between the upper border of superior constrictor and the lower border of the base occipital. Yeah. This gap is bridged by pharyngobasilar fascia. ठीक है? इस गैप में से स्ट्रक्चर्स पास करते हैं. कौन से स्ट्रक्चर्स पास करते हैं? You have the eustachian tube, ऑडिटरी ट्यूब जो होती है, pharyngotympanic tube, वो इसमें से पास करती है. elevator palatine muscle इस गैप में से पास करता है. Ascending palatine artery. ये तीन स्ट्रक्चर्स जो हैं, they pass through this gap, the gap between the basal occiput, and the upper border of superior constrictor muscle. ये superior constrictor है. ये raphe है बेटा, between the buccinator and the pharyngo. is the raphe जो मैंने अभी आपको बताई थी. ठीक है. So इस gap में से you have the passage of auditory tube या eustachian tube, the pharyngotympanic tube, plus levator palatine muscle, plus ascending pharyngeal, ascending palatine, palate की तरफ. ये चीज क्लियर है बेटा कि गैप कैसे आया और इसमें से क्या पास कर रहा है? आगे चलो. Okay, let's move ahead. Actually, now let's come to this particular drawing. This is the opening of the eustachian tube. ठीक है? या pharyngotympanic tube भी कहते हैं इसको. Surrounding the opening of the eustachian tube was this lymphatic aggregate, tubal tonsil. इसको ये चूंकि मून शेप्ड होता है, इसको टॉरस ट्यूब भी कहते हैं. And then extending down behind the and below the opening of the eustachian tube, this was the fold. Deep to this fold is a muscle, salpingopharyngeal muscle, and ये fold जो cover कर रहा है salpingopharyngeal fold था. Just wanted to show you an enlarged view of the eustachian tube. यहाँ पे this is the opening of the eustachian tube. ये आपके tubal tonsil यहाँ पे है, torus tube भी कहते हैं इसको. And this is the salpingopharyngeal fold. ये इसको अब मैं यहाँ repeat करती हूँ. I hope you appreciate one thing. If you remember one thing, I told you immediately posterior to this salpingopharyngeal fold that is behind the opening of the eustachian tube. This is a gap which is called pharyngeal recess. Fossa rosenmolar. देख लीजिए how close it is to the eustachian tube. And outside this, I told you, was the internal carotid artery. यहाँ पे अब मैं आपको ये drawing सिर्फ इसलिए project कर रही हूँ. This is the opening of the eustachian tube. ठीक है? And posterior to the eustachian tube, this is the gap. ये वाला gap. Sorry, I'm sorry. ये gap है. Fossa rosenmolar, pharyngeal recess, and immediately posterior to the fossa of the rosenmolar, this is the internal carotid artery. So any object, any probe or anything that misses the eustachian tube can go into this fossa. Posterior to the fossa is lying the internal carotid artery. यहाँ से slip करके इधर गया and यहाँ internal carotid artery पड़ी. Okay, so now between the base of the skull, ये आपको दिखाना था. Between the base of the skull and the superior constrictor muscle, ये superior constrictor muscle है, यहाँ पे base of the skull है. Okay, between the base of the skull and superior constrictor muscle, you have all this is covered by mucous membrane. Okay, and they make up these coverings of mucous membrane. They make up the walls of fossa rosenmolar. अब गैप की बात किए लेते हैं. गैप बिटवीन द सुपीरियर एंड मिडिल कंस्ट्रिक्टर. ये सुपीरियर कंस्ट्रिक्टर है, ये मिडिल कंस्ट्रिक्टर है. This is the gap between the superior and middle constrictor. What passes through this gap? The structures that pass through the gap between the superior and the middle constrictor are staphypharyngeus, the glossopharyngeal nerve, and the stylohyoid ligament. All these structures start from the outside, enter the inside. That is namely, once again, the stylopharyngeus muscle, the ninth cranial nerve, which is the glossopharyngeal nerve, plus the stylohyoid ligament. They all go from outside to the interior of the pharynx, passing through this gap. Then you have this gap, a gap between the middle constrictor and the inferior constrictor. The inferior constrictor यहाँ से काटा हुआ है. So this gap between the middle and the inferior constrictor. Passing through this gap is the internal laryngeal nerve and the superior laryngeal blood vessels, artery and vein. So the internal laryngeal nerve and the superior laryngeal artery goes into, faces the thyroid membrane, the hyoid bone hai. This is thyroid cartilage, so this is the thyroid membrane. So the structure that faces the thyroid membrane is the internal laryngeal nerve and the superior laryngeal blood vessels. इसमें से artery will go in, and obviously vein would come out of the interior of the larynx. Now there's also a gap between the below the inferior constrictor. ये inferior constrictor है, ये इसका lower border है inferior constrictor का. यहाँ से esophagus है. So below the inferior constrictor, the recurrent laryngeal nerve and the inferior laryngeal artery, they go inside the larynx and they supply the muscles of the larynx. Okay? So the recurrent laryngeal nerve enters the larynx by hooking below the lower border of inferior constrictor. बेटा, it is extremely important. ये रट्टा है, pure रट्टा है, आपको इसी तरह ही लगाना है. प्रॉब्लम ये है कि इसमें से MCQs बहुत frequently आते हैं. The structures passing, one of the following is below the inferior constrictor muscle, or the structure passing between the middle and inferior constrictor muscle is this. आपको ये इसी तरह रट्टा लगाना है, like it or not. Okay, now let's come to the nerve supply of the pharynx. Okay. Nerve supply of the pharynx is by pharyngeal plexus that surrounds this muscle. Pharyngeal plexus is basically a mixed kind of plexus. इसमें sensory fibers भी हैं, इसमें motor fibers भी हैं. It is basically lying, this pharyngeal plexus is lying on this muscle, which is the middle constrictor. So the plexus is lying on the middle constrictor. It is formed by branches of the 10th cranial nerve, the 9th cranial nerve, and then you have sympathetic fibers, vasoconstrictor, sympathetic fibers. अब इसके closest ये है superior cervical ganglion. So this superior cervical ganglion contributes vasoconstrictor fibers. Then you have sensory and motor fibers coming from 9th cranial nerve and 10th cranial nerve. अब ये कैसे सप्लाई करते हैं बेटा? मोटर फाइबर्स प्लीज याद रख लीजिए. One muscle of the pharynx is not supplied by vagus. All other muscles are either supplied by the vagus nerve or the branches of the vagus nerve. The only muscle not supplied by the vagus nerve is this muscle, which is the stylopharyngeus. This is the stylopharyngeus, which is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. अभी ये बात मैंने आपको बताई है. All the other muscles are either supplied by the vagus nerve proper or the branches of the vagus nerve. अभी हमने recurrent laryngeal nerve की बात की थी. It hooks below the inferior border of the inferior constrictor and enters the larynx to supply the muscles of the larynx. So ये vagus की branch है, recurrent laryngeal. तो यहाँ पे vagus nerve directly नहीं supply कर रही, indirectly कर रही. ठीक है? So one muscle supplied by the pharynx का muscle है, stylopharyngeus. उसके अलावा टेंसर पैलेटाई भी करता है 9th cranial nerve से, sorry 5th cranial nerve की mandibular branch से. दो muscles हो गए, लेकिन टेंसर पैलेटाई basically palate का muscle है, pharynx का directly muscle नहीं है. Direct muscle of the pharynx is stylopharyngeus, which is supplied by 9th cranial nerve. So this was the motor nerve supply. अब sensory nerve supply पे आ जाते हैं बेटा. Pharynx के अंदर you have abundance of sensory nerve fibers. इसलिए क्योंकि sensory nerve fibers होंगे तो we will know that something, you are swallowing something, ये sensation आपको feel होती है, you know you are swallowing something, you know something that you have swallowed has gone the wrong way, piriform fossa में चली गई, ठीक है? So you have sensory fibers. All three parts of the pharynx get their sensory nerve supply from the ninth cranial nerve, which is the glossopharyngeal. Okay. However, जो nasopharynx है ना, उसका anterior part, anterior part of the nasopharynx also is supplied by maxillary division of trigeminal nerve, fifth cranial nerve की second division, that is the maxillary division of the fifth cranial nerve. Fifth is trigeminal, B is trigeminal, cranial nerve 5 is trigeminal, is the second branch, which is maxillary. ये nasopharynx का anterior part है. आगे भी देख सकते हैं. One more thing which is of extreme importance, and that is the lymphatic ring. Pharyngeal lymphatic ring, इसका दूसरा नाम Walde's ring है, ठीक है? ये जो pharyngeal lymphatic ring है, this is how it is formed. Tonsils मैंने आपको बताया थे. You have 4 types of tonsils in the pharynx. Tonsil is simply a collection or aggregation of lymphoid follicles. Okay. So this is the pharyngeal tonsil at the junction of the base of the pharynx and nasopharynx and the posterior wall. इसके junction पे you have the pharyngeal tonsil. This is the tubal tonsil over here around the opening of the eustachian tube. Then comes palatine tonsil, वो lateral wall में था between the palatopharyngeus and palatoglossal folds. And now comes the last. अभी ये आपने करना है. This is the tongue, posterior aspect of the tongue. On the posterior aspect of the tongue, you have this collection of lymph nodes. This is called tubal tonsil. ठीक है? So you have pharyngeal tonsil posteriorly, posterior-superiorly pharyngeal tonsils. Over here, you have the tubal tonsil. ये tubal tonsil है lateral side पे. More laterally, inferiorly, you have the palatine tonsil, जो lateral wall में पड़े हुए हैं, somewhere over here. And then you have the lingual tonsil. ये lingual tonsil है. ये posterior aspect of the tongue है, ये lingual tonsil है. ठीक है? ये इनकी placement है. Okay. चलें जी, आज के लिए pharynx को I finished with the pharynx. Okay. It was an extended lecture in continuity. I thought that was a better way of taking it. Now, questions. We have plenty of time. Do you have any questions? जो भी है, जहां भी है, पूछ लीजिए. अभी पूछ लीजिए because उसके बाद अब pharynx repeat नहीं होगा. Next जो भी topic है मैं उसको कर लूंगी. आप बताइए. Any question? Because for the next half an hour मैं इधर ही हूँ. I'll repeat the entire thing on my own. लेकिन आप मुझे अगर कोई question है, if there's anything that you want me to, gaps को repeat कर दो. Okay, fine. I'll do the gaps with you क्योंकि ये they are extremely important. इसमें questions बहुत आते हैं. अच्छा जी, so हमने डिस्कस ये किया था कि the constrictor muscles of the pharynx, the circular muscles of the pharynx, they overlap each other. They are considered to be like tubes, one tube inside the other. These they overlap each other. अब ये जो overlapping tubes हैं, the upper overlapping tube is the superior constrictor, ये uppermost part. इसको overlap कर रहा है ये muscle which is the middle constrictor. ठीक है, ये देख लीजिए. It is overlap. Middle constrictor is overlapping the superior constrictor, and then comes the inferior constrictor. ये inferior constrictor जो है, it is overlapping the middle constrictor. अब इस गैप की बात कर लेते हैं. This gap between the यहाँ पे ये सॉरी सुपीरियर मिडिल नहीं है, सुपीरियर एंड फेरिंगोबासिलो. ये जो फेरिंगोबासिलो फेशिया को करते हैं ये सही है. ये मैं इस गैप को यहाँ ले रही हूँ. This gap between the base of skull and superior constrictor. इस gap, इस triangular gap में से you have the passage of eustachian tube, levator palatine muscle, and ascending palatine artery. Okay, eustachian tube, levator palatine muscle, and ascending palatine artery. ये आपकी किताब में इसी तरह ही दिया हुआ है. Then you have this gap, ये between the superior constrictor and the middle constrictor. ये दिखाऊं, ये superior constrictor है, इसका lower border है. ये middle constrictor है, ये इसका upper border है. Between the superior constrictor and the middle constrictor, you have a muscle which is stylopharyngeus muscle going from outside to the inside. You have the ninth cranial nerve, which is the glossopharyngeal nerve, plus you have a ligament, stylohyoid ligament. Achha. Then comes this gap between the middle constrictor and the inferior constrictor. अब इसमें से कुछ fibers इन्होंने काट दी हैं to show you that deep to these muscles you have this thyrohyoid. This is thyrohyoid membrane because this is the hyoid bone that you see, और ये thyroid cartilage है. Between the two is the thyrohyoid membrane. ठीक है. So piercing the thyrohyoid membrane, going from outside in, you have the internal laryngeal nerve and you have the superior laryngeal artery. अभी हमने internal laryngeal nerve पढ़ी थी, and I told you it was lying deep to the mucous membrane of the piriform fossa. और जो piriform fossa was a fossa on either side of the larynx. So ये larynx है, यहाँ पे on the inside over here you have the piriform fossa यहाँ पे अंदर. Okay? अच्छा जी. Piriform fossa की lateral boundary is thyroid cartilage और thyrohyoid membrane से ही बनी हुई थी. So ये जो arrow अंदर जा रहा है ये piriform fossa में जा रहा है. So this is the internal laryngeal nerve and the superior laryngeal artery and superior laryngeal vein. अब इस पे आ जाते हैं. Below the inferior constrictor, ये जो पैराग्राफ है, below the inferior constrictor, you have this nerve, the recurrent laryngeal nerve, hooking below the inferior border of inferior constrictor muscle. Okay, चलो ये तो हो गया. अब बताइए और मैं आपको क्या बताऊं before I start repeating. Thank you Gaur, thank you very much. Anybody else, anybody other than Gaur, any questions? चलो बेटा एक बात याद रख लीजिए कि ये pharynx, larynx, ये दो आपके हर पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, आप क्लिनिकल पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू कर लें, आपके एग्जामिनेशन पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू कर लें, दिस इज एन एक्सट्रीमली इम्पोर्टेंट टॉपिक. मैं इसको एक क्विक रिकैप दूंगी. आपका होमवर्क ये है कि आपने फेरेंजियल मसल्स की ओरिजिन इंसर्शन खुद करनी है, ठीक है। फारिंक्स पे आ जाते हैं, अ क्विक रिव्यू ऑफ द फारिंक्स। जी थैंक यू माय डियर, गॉड ब्लेस यू। सब डिविजन्स अब हमने कर ली, और वो है the nasopharynx behind the nose, and oropharynx behind the mouth cavity or the oral cavity, and a hypopharynx posterior to the larynx. ये blue part जो है hypopharynx का है। One by one let's do them, और वो है nasopharynx से start करें तो ये posterior opening of the nasopharynx, the area where the nose enters into the nasopharynx, ये जो part है this is called the choane. ये nose है बेटा, getting divided by the nasal septum, the vomer, the bony part of the nasal septum. ये दो posterior ends of the nostrils हैं, nasal cavity की posterior opening, they open into the nasopharynx. ये जो opening है this is the choane, ठीक है। At the junction of the roof of the nasal cavity with the posterior wall. Roof of the nasal cavity is formed by sphenoid bone, base sphenoid. Okay? And this is the posterior wall. This is a part of the occipital bone, base occipit. So at the junction you have this lymphoid aggregation, which is called pharyngeal tonsil, yeah, nasopharyngeal tonsil. People remember this pharyngeal tonsil as adenoids. They can remember one thing: adenoids are enlarged pharyngeal tonsils. A normal pharyngeal tonsil, वो तो बेचारा नजर ही नहीं आता, that is simply called pharyngeal tonsil, या nasopharyngeal tonsil. ठीक है? When enlarged, it is called adenoids. Okay, अब nasopharynx में जो important structure है, that is the opening of the eustachian tube. ठीक है? या auditory tube या lymphotympanic tube. This tube, one on either side, opens into the lateral wall of the nasopharynx. आगे जाके pharyngotympanic tube करेंगे when we do the ear. ठीक है? Surrounding the opening of this pharyngotympanic tube, surrounding is another fold of lymphoid follicles. ठीक है? ये जो fold of lymphoid follicles surrounding the eustachian tube, this is called tubal tonsil. Since it is surrounding the tube, it is called tubal tonsil. And extending down on the medial side of the eustachian tube is this fold of mucous membrane. This is called salpingopharyngeal fold. This is a fold of mucous membrane extending down from the aggregation of lymphoid follicle. Deep to this mucous membrane fold, deep to this fold, you have a muscle which is called salpingopharyngeus muscle. It is basically the salpingopharyngeus muscle covered by mucous membrane, and this mucous membrane forms a fold which is called salpingopharyngeal fold. ठीक है जी? अच्छा, और इससे posteriorly ये देख लीजिए, the very important, ये still posterior to the salpingopharyngeal fold, this is a gap, the pharyngeal recess, fossa of Rosenmuller. और इसकी इंपॉर्टेंस मैंने आपको बता दी थी, मैं फिर रिपीट करती हूँ बेटा. If the eustachian tube gets blocked, somebody tries to put a probe, a pencil, a wire through it, इसको खोलने के लिए, and if it does not go into the eustachian tube, slip करके posteriorly चला जाता है, it goes into the fossa of Rosenmuller. Fossa of Rosenmuller के exactly posteriorly you have the internal carotid artery. So God forbid, this probe or this wire may actually puncture the internal carotid artery lying over here, posterior to the fossa of Rosenmuller. Somewhere over here you have the internal carotid artery. अच्छा जी, ओरोफैरिंक्स पे आ जाते हैं. नेसोफैरिंक्स पे इतना ही काफी है. ओरोफैरिंक्स पे आ जाते हैं. Oropharynx is over here. यहाँ से यहाँ तक. From the soft palate to the upper surface of the epiglottis. ये सारा जो है, this is the oropharynx. Now it is this oropharynx is separated from the oral cavity. It is behind the oral cavity. That is why it's called oropharynx. This opening, which is present between the oral cavity, ये सारी oral cavity है with the tongue, ये muscles of the tongue है, ये सारी oral cavity. This opening between the oral cavity and the border of oropharynx, ये soft palate. This opening is called oropharyngeal isthmus. और इसकी boundaries क्या होंगी ये देख लें. Superiorly soft palate है, inferiorly tongue है. ये इतनी सी opening है. इसमें superiorly soft palate है, inferiorly base of tongue है. और lateral side पे दो arches हैं, palatopharyngeus and palatoglossal arches. हमने अभी मैंने आपको वो दिखाई थी, मैं दोबारा दिखा देती हूँ. ठीक है. So this is the oropharyngeal isthmus. Boundaries पे फिर repeat कर देती हूँ. Superiorly ये सारा soft palate है, ये usual है. Superiorly is soft palate. Laterally palatoglossal fold anteriorly होता है, palatopharyngeal fold posteriorly होता है. So superiorly soft palate, laterally palatoglossal fold, and inferiorly you have this posterior surface या base of the tongue. Okay, ये देख लीजिए. Now between the palatoglossal fold anteriorly है, palatopharyngeal fold posteriorly है. वजह क्या है? Tongue anteriorly होती है, pharynx posteriorly पड़ा हुआ है. So the fold of mucous membrane starting from the soft palate and coming to the end at the tongue. Starting from the soft palate, coming to the end at the tongue. This is the palatoglossal fold. And this fold of mucous membrane starting from the soft palate, coming down to the pharyngeal wall, lateral wall of pharynx. This is palatopharyngeal fold. Okay? Between these two folds, you have this aggregation of lymphoid tissue. This is called palatine tonsil. इसको उर्फ़े आम में tonsil ही कहते हैं. Palatine तो होता है, हम लोग ही कहते हैं. Layman's term में this is simply called tonsil. So जब when you say कि किसी की tonsillectomy हुई है, so that simply means कि उसका palatine tonsil has been removed. Like this, you do not see any palatine tonsil over here. That means कि या तो फिर palatine tonsil बहुत small है, atrophic, or he or she has had tonsillectomy done. ठीक है जी. अब आ जाते हैं floor या bed of the tonsil या lateral wall of the tonsil कैसे बनती है. अभी हमने ये किया था. Lateral wall of ये tonsil है और this is covered by mucous membrane. ये mucous membrane of the tonsil है. ठीक है. Outside the mucous membrane of the tonsil या capsule of the tonsil, ये इसकी capsule है, fibrous capsule होती है. Outside the capsule, in the connective tissue, you have this paratonsillar vein. And then, still outside the paratonsillar vein, this is the pharyngo-basilar fascia. Pharyngo-basilar fascia. Outside this pharyngo-basilar fascia, you have the superior constrictor muscle of the pharynx. And still outside, you have buccopharyngeal fascia, the outermost. And then you have blood vessels, nerves over here, nerves में यहाँ glossopharyngeal nerve आती है, blood vessels में. You all know the blood supply of the branches that supply the tonsil go up in. Plus still actually you have the internal carotid artery also coming over here. ये देख लीजिए, ये internal carotid artery. Okay. Arterial supply हमने बात की थी. ये facial है. So this is tonsillar branch of the facial. Ascending pharyngeal की branch है. ये ascending pharyngeal की branch है. This one. उसके अलावा ये ascending palatine है. You have the descending palatine artery, maxillary की branch है, and then over here lingual की भी branch आ रही है. Okay. And I hope you should appreciate one thing, especially the tonsillar branch of the facial. This is extremely important. All these branches have to be tied before we can remove the tonsil. Plus, all these, this was simply projected to show you that all these blood vessels pierce the constrictor muscles of the superior constrictor muscle of the pharynx and the fascia before it reaches the venous training is key important है because during tonsillectomy, when there is hemorrhage, that simply means कि यहाँ पे the surgeon has failed to ligate or tie up the vein because that is immediately lying immediately outside the capsule. इसको paratonsillar vein कहते हैं. It starts from the soft palate, runs on the lateral side of the tonsil, and then pierces the muscles and fascia of the pharynx and ends into the pharyngeal plexus, which is lying on the surface of the pharyngeal muscles, mainly middle constrictor muscle of the pharynx. Okay, so इसको paratonsillar या external tonsillar, the external palatine vein भी कहते हैं, and this is the usual source of hemorrhage. Blood vessels, arteries से भी damage हो सकता है, लेकिन it is basically this source. अच्छा जी, tonsillar nerve plexus, 9th or 10th cranial nerve, glossopharyngeal and vagus से बनता है, and then lymphatic drainage जो है वो एक तो jugular digastric या tonsillar nodes में जाती है, plus angle of the mandible पे या lateral and inferior portion में जाएगी. Laryngopharynx की बात कर लेते हैं. This part of the pharynx between the epiglottis and this is the ये cricoid cartilage है बेटा. This wide posteriorly. This is the cricoid cartilage and this is the inlet of the larynx. Okay, so ये जो level है laryngopharynx का, this extends from 4th cervical vertebra to the 6th cervical vertebra. By the way, laryngopharynx को मैंने आपको पहले भी बताया था. Clinicians, ENT surgeons call this hypopharynx. और ये laryngopharynx, I hope you appreciate it. This is the opening or the inlet of the larynx. This opens into the walls of the, these are the walls of the pharynx. So ये nasal laryngopharynx. The pharynx outside the larynx is laryngopharynx और ये जो opening ये communicate करती है with the laryngopharynx. I hope you can also appreciate that when you swallow, food comes, ये mouth cavity है, ये tongue नजर आ रही है. Food comes from in here, it pushes the epiglottis and the epiglottis comes down, covers the opening of the larynx, and the food then slips over this surface and goes into the pharynx. Larynx की बचत हो जाती है. ये आप अपनी फिजियोलॉजी में पढ़ेंगे. ओके, बस ये देख लीजिए कि laryngopharynx की हम बात करते हैं. Two muscles are forming the posterior boundary of the laryngopharynx, namely the middle constrictor and the inferior constrictor. ये जो है ना, ये laryngopharynx को cover करते हैं on the outside. So laryngopharynx के muscles middle and inferior constrictor है, इसमें superior constrictor का कोई रोल नहीं है. Okay. लेकिन on the inside जब हम लेरिंगोफैरिंक्स की बात करते हैं तो ये जो इंफीरियर मसल्स हैं, एक तो स्टाइलोफैरिंजियस के एंड पैराटोफैरिंजियस, ये जो दो मसल्स हैं, on the inside these two muscles and on the outside you have middle and inferior constrictor muscles. Okay, palatopharyngeus, stylopharyngeus on the, ये internal muscles हैं और external muscles ये हैं जो circular muscles या constrictor muscles हैं, उनमें middle constrictor and inferior constrictor muscle. Logi. Now we come to this piriform fossa. Once again, मैं फिर आपको समझा देती हूँ, बेटा इसको समझ लीजिए, ये बहुत important है. Piriform fossa is simply a fossa, a recess, a depression present on either side of the larynx. ये larynx है, ये सारा larynx है, ये cricoid cartilage है, जिसके ऊपर ये posterior larynx का मसल ये इसमें attached पे दिखाया हुआ. Okay, अब ये जो fold है ना, ये cartilages of the larynx पड़ी हुई है. This is the epiglottis. So ये जो fold है, epiglottic, between the epiglottis and the arytenoid cartilage, ये arytenoid cartilage है. So this fold between the arytenoid cartilage and the epiglottis, ये epiglottic fold है. ठीक है, यहाँ पे this is the epiglottic fold, ये सारी, and on either side over here this is the piriform fossa. So I hope you appreciate कि ये जो epiglottic fold है, this is actually lying between the inlet of the larynx and the piriform fossa. और इस piriform fossa की lateral boundary कैसे बनी है? Above by the hyoid membrane, ये जो fibers नजर आ रहे हैं, hyoid bone, thyroid cartilage. So you have the hyoid membrane. So its piriform fossa deep is covered by mucous membrane, and deep to the mucous membrane you have branches of the internal laryngeal nerve and blood vessels, जो है superior laryngeal blood vessels. और मैंने आपको बताया था, if the internal laryngeal nerve, अच्छा इस piriform fossa का function क्या है? If God forbid any foreign body comes and gets stuck over here, the person would reflexively start to cough, because it's internal laryngeal nerve है ना, this is purely sensory and it supplies this area and the larynx, sensory fibers to the larynx and to the piriform fossa. अब sensory fibers to the piriform fossa का मतलब है कि as soon as something comes and touches this area, the person starts to cough. So कोई foreign body यहाँ पे आए, जरा सा भी देर रुके, खाने के दौरान अगर आप खांसना शुरू कर दें तो फिर आप simply समझ जाइए कि food has gone the wrong way, वो इधर चला गया. अब क्या होता है, at times this area gets damaged, कोई fish bone, कोई chicken की sharp bone, कोई edge, अगर if the scum gets stuck over here and pierces this thyroid membrane, जिसकी वजह से internal laryngeal nerve damage होगी. Internal laryngeal nerve जब damage होगी, that means कि ये area सारा insensitive है. जब ये area insensitive है, तो यहाँ पे कोई foreign body आ जाए, poor man or the poor lady will not know that there is a foreign body stuck up here, and this area is dangerous because this foreign body can roll over and simply enter the laryngeal inlet and down into the larynx and then into the larynx. ये इसकी importance है, very important from your practical point of view, from the examination point of view. ये सबका बहुत favorite है piriform fossa. ठीक है जी. अच्छा, muscles आपको बताया था, they are arranged in 3 layers. On the outside, circular muscles, innermost superior constrictor, उसको overlap कर रहा है middle constrictor on the outside, and outermost is the inferior constrictor. अच्छा जी, अब inner muscles, layer of muscles जो है ये longitudinal muscles हैं. Salpingopharyngeus uppermost, most superior, nasopharynx तक जाता है, ये eustachian tube है. So this is the salpingopharyngeus, opens the eustachian tube. ये palatopharyngeus, and inferior most is the stylopharyngeus. इनकी अटैचमेंट्स मैंने आपसे कहा, आपको कर लीजिए. ये लास्ट थिंग pharyngeal fascia, 3 fascia है. Innermost pharyngobasilar fascia, outermost buccopharyngeal fascia. दोनों fascia के दरमियान ये लेयर ऑफ सर्कुलर मसल. ठीक है जी, यहाँ पे आपको समझा दिया था. Inside out you have mucous membrane की layer, then you have pharyngobasilar fascia. I'm sorry. Then comes the 2 layers of muscles. I'm sorry. ये 2 मसल्स के लेयर हैं, ये longitudinal मसल है, ये सर्कुलर मसल है, and buccopharyngeal fascia. Okay, that is enough for today. Inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow morning. Fine. God bless you all. Khuda Hafiz.